The mare came into the corral like a thunderstorm, eyes rolling white and nostrils flared wide enough to show the pink flesh inside, and Fiona Bennett knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before the terrified animal would hurt herself trying to escape. She moved without thinking, her boots silent in the dust as she approached the fence line, her voice dropping to that low, steady murmur that came from somewhere deep in her chest. The mare's ears swiveled toward her, and Fiona kept talking. Not words exactly, but sounds that carried calm the way a river carries water. Within moments, the horse's breathing slowed, and by the time Fiona had climbed into the corral, the mare was standing still, trembling but no longer panicked. "Well, I'll be damned," a voice said from behind her, and Fiona turned to see a tall man leaning against the fence post, his hat pulled low but not low enough to hide the genuine surprise in his expression. He was probably in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of lean muscle that came from years of hard work. "I've been trying to get near that horse for 3 days. She nearly kicked my best hand through the barn wall yesterday." Fiona kept one hand on the mare's neck, feeling the animal's pulse begin to settle under her palm. "She's scared, not mean. There's a difference." She studied the stranger, noting the quality of his boots and the silver buckle on his belt. Ranch owner, she guessed, not just a hired hand. "You must be the one who bought her from Tom Henderson's estate sale." "Xander Jamison," he said, extending his hand over the fence. "And yes, though I'm starting to think Henderson's widow saw me coming. This mare was supposed to be broken to saddle. She was once." Fiona ran her hand down the mare's shoulder, finding the old rope burns she'd spotted from across the corral. Someone tried to break her spirit instead of earning her trust. It's going to take time to undo that kind of damage. She looked up at Xander Jamison, meeting his eyes directly in a way that made some men uncomfortable. She'd learned young that she didn't care much for the ones who couldn't handle a woman's direct gaze. Time and patience and someone who knows what they're doing. Xander pushed his hat back, revealing dark hair that fell across his forehead. His eyes were the color of strong coffee, and they studied her with an intensity that made something flutter in Fiona's chest. She ignored it. She'd come to Ruby City, Idaho to start over, not to get tangled up with a rancher, no matter how handsome he might be. "Tom Henderson mentioned you before he passed," Xander said. "Said there was a woman who'd worked with his horses, had a real gift for it. I thought he was exaggerating the way old men do when they tell stories." "Tom was a good man and an honest one," Fiona said quietly. His death 3 months ago had been the reason she'd found herself at loose ends, looking for new work in a town where opportunities for women were limited to teaching, sewing, or worse. "He taught me a lot of what I know about horses, though my grandmother taught me first." She stroked the mare's nose, smiling as the horse blew soft air against her palm. "This girl's going to be just fine given time. She's got good bones, good spirit underneath the fear." "How long would it take?" Xander asked. "To gentle her properly, I mean." Fiona considered. "Depends on the horse, depends on the handler. Could be weeks, could be months. Why? You looking to sell her on once she's trained?" "No," Xander said, and something in his voice made Fiona look at him again. "I'm looking to hire the person who can train her. My ranch needs someone like you, Miss Bennett, someone who understands horses the way you clearly do." He gestured toward the mare, who was now resting her head against Fiona's shoulder in a gesture of complete trust. "I've got 20 horses on my property, and I'm buying more next month. I need someone who can work with them, gentle the wild ones, keep the broken ones healthy. Tom always said you were the best he'd ever seen." Fiona's heart beat faster, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's a big job for a woman, Mr. Jamison. Most men wouldn't trust it to someone like me." "Most men are fools," Xander said bluntly. "I care about results, not about what people think is proper. I've seen what you can do in the space of 5 minutes. I can only imagine what you could do with real time and resources." He paused, then added, "The job comes with a cottage on the property, meals included, and a salary of $40 a month. That's more than I pay any of my other hands, but from what I've seen, you'd be worth it." $40 a month was more than generous. It was more than Fiona had made working for Tom Henderson, though she'd loved the old man too much to ever complain about the wages. It was enough to save, to build a real future instead of just scraping by. But living on Xander Jamison's ranch, seeing him every day working alongside him, that felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with horses. She'd felt that flutter again when he'd looked at her, and Fiona had learned the hard way that feelings could complicate things fast. Still, she needed the work, and the horses needed her. "I'd want to do things my way," she said. "No rough breaking, no cruelty. If I see any of your hands mistreating an animal, I'll speak up, owner's permission or not." Xander's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Do we have a deal, Miss Bennett?" Fiona looked at the mare, who had settled completely now, her eyes half closed in contentment. She thought about the cramped room she was renting above the general store in Ruby City, about the dwindling coins in her pocket, about the way people looked at her when she walked down the street, a woman alone, without family, without protection. She thought about wide open spaces and horses who needed her and work that mattered. "We have a deal, Mr. Jamison," she said, and reached over the fence to shake his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. The handshake lasted perhaps a moment longer than it needed to, and when Fiona pulled her hand back, she could still feel the warmth of his skin against hers. She turned back to the mare quickly, using the excuse of checking the horse's legs to hide the color she felt rising in her cheeks. This was just a job, she told herself firmly. Just a job, and nothing more. "When can you start?" Xander asked. "Tomorrow," Fiona said. "I don't have much to pack." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of late spring day that promised warmth by afternoon but still held a hint of winter's chill in the shadows. Fiona loaded her few possessions into the wagon Xander had sent for her, ignoring the curious stares of her neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house next door actually came out onto her porch to watch, her mouth pinched in disapproval. Fiona knew what the woman was thinking, what most of the town would think about a young, unmarried woman going to live on a bachelor's ranch. She lifted her chin and climbed onto the wagon seat beside the driver, a grizzled man who introduced himself as Charlie and didn't seem inclined toward conversation. The ride out to Xander's ranch took about an hour, following the Snake River north before cutting east into rolling grassland. The land here was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. All sage and wild grass with mountains rising blue in the distance. Fiona had grown up in Colorado, in similar country, and the sight of it made something in her chest loosen. She'd been living in Ruby City for 3 months since Tom Henderson died, and she hadn't realized until this moment how much she'd missed open space. The ranch came into view gradually, revealing itself in pieces as they crested a low hill. The main house was substantial, built of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood a large barn painted red, and beyond that several corrals and outbuildings. Fiona could see horses in the nearest pasture, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. It was a prosperous operation, the kind that took years to build and steady hands to maintain. Xander emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled up, wiping his hands on his pants. He'd pushed his sleeves up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his dark hair was slightly mussed. He looked younger somehow than he had yesterday, more approachable, though the intensity in his eyes remained the same. "Miss Bennett," he said, reaching up to help her down from the wagon. "Welcome to the Jamison Ranch." His hands on her waist were steady and brief, but Fiona felt the touch all the way through her layers of clothing. She stepped back quickly, busying herself with retrieving her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Jamison. It's a beautiful property." "Call me Xander," he said. "We don't stand much on formality out here." He gestured toward a small cottage set back from the main house, nestled among a grove of cottonwood trees. "That's yours. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private. Charlie, help Miss Bennett get her things settled, would you?" He turned back to Fiona. Come find me at the barn when you're ready. I'll introduce you to the rest of the horses and show you where everything is." The cottage was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a lean-to for cooking, but it was clean and sturdy and entirely hers. Fiona had never lived alone before she'd gone from her grandmother's house to working for Tom Henderson, who'd provided a room in his family home, and she felt an unexpected rush of pleasure as she set her bag on the narrow bed and looked around. There was a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Curtains hung at the window, faded but cheerful, and someone had left a jar of wildflowers on the table. She didn't let herself linger. There would be time later to settle in properly. For now, she changed into her work clothes, split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a plain cotton shirt, and braided her long auburn hair back from her face. She checked her reflection in the small mirror on the wall, noting the dusting of freckles across her nose and the way the sun had already begun to bring color to her cheeks. She was 22 years old, healthy and strong, and she had work to do. That was enough. Xander was waiting for her at the barn along with 2 other men. One was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with a shock of blonde hair and an eager expression. The other was older, close to 50, with gray in his beard and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. "Miss Bennett, this is Jake Thornton," Xander said, indicating the older man. "My foreman. And this is Samuel Price. They'll be working with you on the horses." Jake nodded respectfully, his eyes assessing but not unfriendly. "Tom Henderson spoke highly of you, miss. Any friend of Tom's is welcome here." "I appreciate that," Fiona said. She liked the straightforward way Jake met her eyes, the lack of either condescension or inappropriate interest. Samuel just grinned and ducked his head, clearly too shy to speak. "Let me show you the stock," Xander said, and led her into the barn. It was spacious and well-maintained, with 10 stalls along each side and a tack room at the far end. The smell of hay and horses and leather filled the air, familiar and comforting. Several horses poked their heads over stall doors as they entered, curious about the newcomer. Xander walked her down the line, introducing each horse by name and temperament. There was Ranger, a steady bay gelding used for long rides; Duchess, a pretty chestnut mare with excellent bloodlines; Thunder, a gray stallion with a mischievous streak; and more, each with their own personality and quirks. Fiona listened carefully, noting which horses seemed relaxed and which showed signs of tension or poor handling. Most were in good condition, well fed and groomed, but a few carried themselves in ways that suggested problems. "That one," she said, stopping in front of a stall near the end. The horse inside was a young black gelding, probably 3 years old, who pressed himself into the far corner when they approached. "What's his story?" Xander's expression darkened. "That's Midnight. I bought him 6 months ago from a trader passing through. He's got excellent lines, should be one of the best horses I own, but he won't let anyone near him. Won't eat if there's a person in the barn. Won't tolerate a rope or a saddle. I've been patient with him, but I'm running out of ideas." Fiona studied the gelding, noting the way he held his weight on 3 legs, favoring his left hind. "He's in pain," she said quietly. "Look at how he's standing. Someone hurt him, probably in the breaking process, and now he associates people with pain." She kept her voice low and soothing, the same tone she'd used with the mare yesterday. "Hey there, beautiful. Nobody's going to hurt you, I promise." Midnight's ears flicked toward her, though he didn't move from the corner. Fiona hummed softly, a melody her grandmother had taught her years ago, and waited. Patience was the first and most important tool in working with traumatized horses. You couldn't rush trust. You could only offer it, consistently and genuinely, and wait for the animal to accept it. "How long will that take?" Samuel whispered from behind her. "As long as it takes," Fiona said. She finally stepped back from the stall, giving Midnight space. "I'll need to work with him every day, maybe several times a day. No one else should approach him for now, just me. And I'll need someone to check his left hind leg, probably need the farrier or a veterinarian to look at it." "Doc Miller comes through once a month," Jake said. "He's due next week." Does horses as well as people. Good. Fiona turned to Xander. The mare from yesterday, the one from Henderson's place, where is she? Out in the south pasture. I thought she'd do better with space and other horses around her. You thought right, Fiona said, impressed. Many men would have locked a difficult horse in a stall, thinking containment meant control. Can we go see her? They walked out together, leaving Jake and Samuel to their other duties. The south pasture stretched for several acres, lush with spring grass, and a dozen horses grazed peacefully within its fences. The mare stood slightly apart from the others, but she was grazing, her body language relaxed. When Fiona whistled, the mare's head came up, ears pricked forward. You gave her a name yet? Fiona asked. I was thinking I'd leave that to you, Xander said, since you'll be working with her. Fiona watched the mare approach, moving with the natural grace of a creature beginning to remember what it felt like to be unafraid. Willow, she said, she's strong but flexible, and she's learning to bend instead of break. Willow it is, Xander agreed. He was standing close enough that Fiona could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to his clothes. She was acutely aware of him in a way that was entirely inappropriate for an employer and employee, and she forced herself to take a step away, focusing on Willow instead. Tell me about your plans for the ranch, she said, keeping her voice businesslike. You said you were expanding. What are you looking to do? Xander seemed to accept the change of subject without comment. I want to breed quality horses, he said. Not just working stock, though we'll always need those, but horses with real bloodlines. Horses people will come from 3 states away to buy. Idaho's growing fast and there's a market for good animals. I've got the land, I've got the capital to invest, but I need horses that are properly trained, that show well. He paused. That's where you come in. I can manage the business side, but I can't do what you do. Can't gentle the difficult ones, can't bring out the best in an animal the way you can. There was admiration in his voice, genuine respect, and Fiona felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again. She busied herself with petting Willow, who had come close enough to nose at her pockets looking for treats. I'll do my best, she said, but you should know, Mr. Jamison Xander, that my methods are slow. You won't see dramatic changes overnight. Real training, the kind that lasts, takes time. I have time, Xander said, and I'd rather do this right than do it fast. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horses graze. The sun was climbing higher, warming the air, and a meadowlark sang from a fence post nearby. Fiona felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. This place, this work, it felt like where she was supposed to be. I should let you get started, Xander said finally. If you need anything, the house is always open. I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who cooks for me in the hands. You're welcome to take your meals with us, or she can bring something to your cottage if you'd prefer privacy. I'll take meals with everyone, Fiona decided. She'd spent too much of her life being set apart, being different. If she was going to make a life here, she needed to be part of the community, not separate from it. And Xander, thank you for the opportunity. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that was somehow both respectful and intimate. Thank you for taking it. I have a feeling you're going to change everything around here, Miss Bennett. Fiona, she said impulsively. If I'm calling you Xander, you should call me Fiona. His smile was genuine and warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Fiona it is. The first week passed in a blur of work. Fiona rose before dawn and often didn't stop until well after dark, learning the routines of the ranch, getting to know each horse individually, establishing her presence in the barn and pastures. She spent hours with Willow, gradually introducing the mare to saddle and bridle again, moving so slowly that progress was measured in moments rather than milestones. By the end of the week, Willow would stand calmly while Fiona brushed her and checked her hooves, and had even accepted a saddle blanket without panicking. Midnight was more challenging. The black gelding remained deeply suspicious of human contact, and Fiona had to content herself with simply sitting near his stall, talking or humming, letting him get used to her presence. When Doc Miller arrived to check the ranch's horses, Midnight initially refused to allow an examination, but Fiona managed to coax him close enough for the doctor to observe his gait. The diagnosis was a strained tendon, probably from being forced to work before he was ready, and Doc Miller prescribed rest and warm compresses. "That horse is lucky to have you. Di kanu ski," the doctor said to Fiona as he packed up his bag. He was a rotund man with kind eyes and surprisingly gentle hands. Most people would have given up on him by now, sold him for meat or worse. "Most people don't understand what horses need," Fiona said. She was preparing a bucket of warm water and herbs for midnight's compress, following Doc Miller's instructions. "They think training is about dominance, about breaking the horse's will. But it's really about partnership, about earning trust." "Tom Henderson said the same thing," Doc Miller observed. "He said you learned from your grandmother that she had the old knowledge." Fiona nodded. "My grandmother was Shoshone. She grew up with horses, understood them in a way most white people don't. She taught me to listen, really listen, to what horses are telling us. Their ears, their posture, their breathing, it's all communication if you know how to read it." "Tom said you could calm any wild horse with a whisper," Doc Miller said, his tone curious rather than skeptical. "I thought he was exaggerating, but I saw you work with that black gelding. There's something to it." "It's not magic," Fiona said, though she smiled. "It's just patience and understanding, and maybe a little bit of my grandmother's teachings." She glanced toward Midnight's stall. "This one's going to take time, but he'll come around. They almost always do." She spent the rest of that afternoon applying compresses to Midnight's leg, working slowly and carefully, talking to him the whole time. By the time she finished, the gelding was allowing her to stand beside him without pressing into the corner, a small but significant victory. Fiona left the barn feeling tired but satisfied, looking forward to the hot meal Mrs. Chen would have waiting. Meals at the Jamison Ranch were communal affairs with Xander, his hands, and now Fiona gathering around a large table in the ranch house kitchen. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese immigrant who'd come to Idaho during the gold rush years and had stayed when her husband died, finding work as a housekeeper and cook. She was perhaps 60 years old, with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that Fiona immediately appreciated. The food she prepared was an interesting blend of traditional American fare and Chinese influences, and it was consistently delicious. That evening, Fiona found herself seated across from Xander with Jake and Samuel on either side and two other hands, brothers named Thomas and Robert Keene, at the far end of the table. The conversation was easy and relaxed, centered on the day's work and plans for tomorrow. Fiona noticed that Xander ran his ranch democratically, asking for input from his men and actually listening to their suggestions. It was unusual and refreshing. "How's that black devil treating you?" Thomas asked Fiona, helping himself to more potatoes. Thomas was the elder brother, probably in his mid-30s, with a scar along his jaw that he'd gotten from a bull, according to Samuel. "Better," Fiona said. "Doc Miller confirmed what I suspected. He's got a strained tendon. Once that heals and he learns that people aren't going to hurt him, he'll be fine." "If you say so," Thomas said doubtfully. "That horse has a mean streak." "That horse is scared," Fiona corrected, keeping her tone mild but firm. "There's a difference. Mean is intentional. Fear is reactive. Once Midnight feels safe, the behavior will change." "Tom Henderson used to say the same thing," Jake interjected. "About horses being scared, not mean. I've seen it prove true more often than not." He nodded at Fiona. "You've got his wisdom, that's for sure." The praise warmed Fiona more than she wanted to admit. She'd spent so much of her life being dismissed or doubted because of her gender, her mixed heritage, her unconventional methods. Finding people who respected her knowledge was still new enough to feel precious. She caught Xander's eye across the table and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, he smiled, and Fiona felt her cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate quickly, reminding herself sternly that Xander Jamison was her employer, nothing more, but as the days turned into weeks, it became harder and harder to maintain that professional distance. Xander was often in the barn, or the corrals, working alongside his men rather than simply directing them, and he had a habit of seeking Fiona out to ask her opinion on various horses or training methods. They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, discussing everything from breeding lines to the best grazing rotation to the merits of different saddle designs. Xander was intelligent and curious, genuinely interested in learning from her expertise, and Fiona found herself looking forward to their talks. He also had a sense of humor that caught her off guard. One afternoon, when a young colt managed to slip his halter and lead Fiona on a merry chase around the corral, Xander leaned against the fence and called out helpful suggestions like, "Have you tried asking him nicely?" and maybe he'd respond better to poetry. Fiona, laughing too hard to be properly annoyed, finally cornered the colt and got the halter back on. When she climbed out of the corral, breathless and dusty, Xander handed her a canteen of water and said, "That was the most entertaining thing I've seen all week." "Glad I could provide amusement," Fiona said dryly, but she was smiling. The colt had been playing, not escaping, testing boundaries in the way young horses did. It was actually a sign of growing comfort and confidence. "In all seriousness," Xander said, his expression sobering, "you've done remarkable work in the past month. Willow's like a different horse, and even Midnight's starting to come around. The other horses are calmer, better behaved. The men have noticed it too. You've exceeded every expectation I had." "I'm just doing my job," Fiona said, uncomfortable with the direct praise even as it pleased her. "You're doing more than that," Xander said quietly. "You're building something here, something lasting." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I'm grateful you took the position, Fiona. I can't imagine the ranch without you now." The intensity in his eyes made Fiona's breath catch. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth of his body in the cooling evening air. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, thought she might let him. Then Samuel called out from the barn, something about a loose board, and the moment broke. Xander stepped back, looking almost embarrassed, and Fiona busied herself with returning the water canteen to its hook. "I should wash up for dinner," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Of course," Xander said. "I'll see you at the house." Fiona walked back to her cottage in a daze, her heart beating faster than the short walk warranted. She was falling for Xander Jamison, she realized, with a mixture of exhilaration and dread, falling hard and fast, despite every intention to keep things professional. She could tell herself it was just gratitude for the job, just appreciation for his respect and kindness, but she'd be lying. The truth was that she thought about him constantly, found excuses to seek him out, felt a rush of warmth every time he smiled at her. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came unexpectedly the following week, when a group of men rode onto the ranch just before sunset. Fiona was working with Willow in the round pen, practicing basic commands, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Something in the way they rode, fast and aggressive, made her tense. She led Willow to the gate and secured it, then walked quickly toward the main yard where the riders had stopped. There were 5 of them, rough-looking men with trail dust on their clothes and hard expressions on their faces. The one in front, a big man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, was arguing with Xander, who stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Jake and Thomas had emerged from the barn, and Fiona noticed they'd positioned themselves strategically. Jake near the house where the rifles were kept, Thomas between the strangers and the horse pastures. "I told you, Garrett," Xander was saying, his voice cold and level. "I'm not interested in your proposal. Take your business elsewhere." "Now that's not very neighborly," the scarred man, apparently named Garrett, said. His voice was syrupy and false, the tone of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. "I'm offering you fair market price for your stock." "More than fair, considering." "Considering what?" Xander asked dangerously. Garrett shrugged. "Considering things happen on ranches out here. Fences get cut, horses go missing, barns catch fire. It's a shame, but the territory's rough. A man needs friends to help him protect what's his." It was a protection racket, Fiona realized with a cold shock. Garrett and his men were threatening Xander, trying to force him to sell his horses at whatever price they dictated. She'd heard of such things happening in Colorado, criminal gangs that preyed on isolated ranches, but she hadn't expected to encounter it here. "I have all the friends I need," Xander said, his hand resting casually near his hip where Fiona knew he carried a pistol. and I protect what's mine just fine. I'll ask you once more politely to leave my property." Garrett's eyes narrowed, and his hand moved toward his own weapon. Fiona acted on instinct, stepping forward into the tense space between the two groups of men. "Gentlemen," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Every eye turned to her. Garrett looked her up and down with an expression that made Fiona's skin crawl. "And who might you be, sweetheart?" "Someone who works here," Fiona said firmly, ignoring the endearment. "And someone who can tell you that Mr. Jamison isn't exaggerating about his ability to protect his property. He's got good men, good security, and horses that are worth far more than whatever you're offering. So unless you're interested in legitimate business, conducted in town with proper contracts and witnesses, I'd suggest you take his advice and leave." "Fiona," Xander said quietly, a warning in his tone, but she ignored him. She'd grown up with men like Garrett, bullies who relied on intimidation and threat. She'd learned young that sometimes the best way to diffuse violence was to disrupt the expected pattern, to introduce an element that didn't fit the script. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, then started to laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But this is business between men, and you'd be wise to stay out of it." "Business between men," Fiona repeated. "Is that what we're calling threats and extortion now?" She kept her voice steady, conversational even, though her heart was pounding, because last I checked, that was called crime, and Idaho territory had laws against it. One of Garrett's men shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. Fiona focused on him, sensing weakness. "How about you?" she asked. "You comfortable with threatening honest people trying to make a living? That the kind of man you want to be?" "Shut your mouth," Garrett snarled, all pretense of civility gone now, "though before I shut it for you." "Touch her, and you'll be dead before you hit the ground," Xander said, and there was something absolutely lethal in his voice. He'd moved forward to stand beside Fiona, his body angled protectively in front of hers. Jake had reappeared on the porch with a rifle cradled in his arms, and Samuel had materialized from the barn with another. The odds had shifted subtly but definitively. Garrett looked around, calculating, and apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. "This isn't over," he said, yanking his horse's head around. "You'll be seeing me again, Jamison." "Not if you're smart," Xander said flatly. The 5 men rode out at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the evening air. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Xander rounded on Fiona, his face tight with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Those men are dangerous. You could have been hurt." "I was thinking that I could distract them long enough for Jake to get to the rifles," Fiona shot back, her own fear translating into anger now that the immediate danger had passed. "I was thinking that someone needed to disrupt the situation before it turned into a gunfight that could have gotten you killed." "You put yourself at risk," Xander said, his voice rough. "You stepped right into the middle of a potential bloodbath, and you—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You can't do that, Fiona. You can't." "I can, and I did," Fiona said stubbornly. "This is my home too, Xander. This ranch, these horses. The people here, I care about what happens. I'm not going to stand by and watch while men like Garrett threaten everything we're building." Something shifted in Xander's expression at her words, particularly at the word "we." He stared at her for a long moment, and Fiona stared back, neither of them willing to look away first. The air between them felt charged, electric, full of things that hadn't been said. "You scared the hell out of me," Xander said finally, his voice dropping to something low and intense. "When you stepped in front of Garrett, all I could think was that if something happened to you, if he hurt you—" He stopped, shook his head. "I can't lose you, Fiona. I can't." Fiona's breath caught. There was no mistaking the meaning behind those words, the emotion behind them. "Xander," she said softly, and found she didn't have words for what she wanted to say. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. His palm was warm and calloused, familiar even though they'd never held hands before. Xander looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. I know you're my employee, he said quietly, aware that Jake and the others were still within earshot, pretending not to watch. I know this is complicated, but Fiona, I need you to know you're more to me than just someone who works here. You've been more to me almost from the first day. I know, Fiona whispered. I feel it too. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there in the yard, in front of everyone. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently, then released it. We should talk, he said. Properly, but first, I need to ride into town and report this to the marshal. Garrett and his men are known troublemakers, but threatening a ranch owner on his own property crosses a line. The law needs to know. I'll come with you, Fiona said immediately. Fiona. I'm a witness, she pointed out. And before you argue, remember that I'm at least as stubborn as you are. Xander's mouth quirked into a reluctant smile. I'm learning that. He turned to Jake. Double the watch tonight. I don't think Garrett will come back this soon, but I'd rather be cautious. And Jake, thank you. You got to that rifle fast. Jake nodded. Miss Bennett bought us time. That was good thinking, even if it was risky. They rode into Ruby City as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The marshal's office was a small building on the main street, and Marshal Tom Bridger was just locking up for the evening when they arrived. Bridger was a former Army officer, a fair man with a reputation for being tough but honest. He listened to Xander's account of the confrontation, making notes and asking occasional questions. Garrett's been a problem for a while now, Bridger said when Xander finished. We've had reports of him harassing smaller ranchers, but nobody's been willing to testify. They're too scared of retaliation. I'll testify, Xander said firmly, and I'll encourage others to come forward. Men like Garrett only have power if we let them intimidate us into silence. That's brave talk, Bridger said. But be careful, Jamison. Garrett's got friends, some of them in positions you might not expect. Watch your back. They left the marshal's office as full dark was falling. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Both of them lost in thought. Fiona was acutely aware of Xander beside her, of the way their horses moved in rhythm, of the warmth of his presence in the cooling night air. When they reached the ranch, Xander dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. Walk with me? He asked quietly. Fiona nodded, and they left the horses with Samuel, who'd been waiting by the barn. Xander led her away from the buildings, out toward the pasture where the horses grazed peacefully under the rising moon. When they were far enough away for privacy, he stopped and turned to face her. I meant what I said earlier, he began. About you being more to me than an employee. Fiona, from the first moment I saw you with that mare, calming her with just your voice, I knew you were special. And then I got to know you, really know you. And I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just respect or admiration, it was more than that. Much more. Fiona's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. What are you saying, Xander? I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Maybe I've already fallen. I think about you constantly. When I wake up, my first thought is wondering if you're already at the barn. When I go to sleep, I'm thinking about something you said that day, or the way you laughed at dinner, or how the sun looked in your hair. I know it's complicated because I'm your employer, and I swear to you I'll never use that position to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. If you don't feel the same way, we'll go back to how things were. And I'll never mention it again, but I had to tell you. After today, after nearly losing you to Garrett's threats, I had to tell you the truth. Fiona was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. Then she said, Do you know why I took this job? Xander shook his head. Because I needed the work, yes. But also because when you looked at me that first day, you saw me. Not a woman who should be teaching school or sewing, not someone who was odd or strange for preferring horses to society. You saw what I could do, what I was good at, and you valued it. You respected me. And then I got to know you and I realized you were kind and fair and intelligent, that you treated your workers well and your animals better, that you had integrity and courage. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. I've been falling for you too, Xander, fighting it because I thought I should, because it seemed foolish to risk my job and my home for feelings. But today, when I saw you facing down those men, all I could think was that I couldn't stand by and let you be hurt, that you mattered too much to me. Fiona, Xander breathed, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones gently. Can I kiss you, please? She whispered. And then his mouth was on hers, warm and sure and achingly tender. Fiona melted into him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, her fingers threading into his hair. The kiss deepened, growing more passionate, and Fiona felt heat flood through her body. She'd been kissed before, a few fumbling attempts by boys in Colorado, but nothing like this. Nothing that made her feel like she was coming apart and being put back together all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, he said. I want to court you, Fiona, publicly, so everyone knows my intentions are honorable. I want to take you to church socials and dances and anywhere else you want to go. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours. Yes, Fiona said, laughing a little at the rush of joy that filled her. Yes to all of it. They walked back to the buildings hand in hand, and if the ranch hands noticed and exchanged knowing glances, neither Fiona nor Xander cared. That night Fiona lay in her bed in the cottage, touching her lips and remembering the feel of Xander's mouth on hers, and thought that she'd never been happier. The courtship that followed was the talk of Ruby City. Xander was true to his word, escorting Fiona to church every Sunday, to town socials and dances, making his intentions absolutely clear to anyone who cared to notice. Some people gossiped. Of course, there were always those who found something to criticize, but most of the community seemed to approve. Tom Henderson had been beloved in Ruby City, and people remembered how highly he'd spoken of Fiona. And Xander had a reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher, the kind of man any woman would be lucky to marry, because that was clearly where this was heading. Xander made no secret of the fact that he was courting Fiona with marriage in mind. He brought her flowers, wildflowers gathered from the ranch's fields, because he knew she preferred them to hothouse roses. He gave her books, discovering her love of reading and tracking down novels and poetry collections from as far away as Boise. He took her riding on Sunday afternoons, the two of them exploring the beautiful country around Ruby City, sometimes racing their horses across open meadows, sometimes simply walking and talking for hours. The work at the ranch continued, and Fiona found that being courted by Xander didn't change her professional relationship with him or the respect the other hands showed her. If anything, the men seemed more relaxed now that everything was out in the open, teasing Xander good-naturedly about being love-struck and treating Fiona like a valued friend. Willow had progressed to the point where Fiona could ride her confidently, the mare's trust fully restored, and Midnight, after months of patient work, finally allowed Fiona to approach him freely, even nuzzling her pockets for treats. The transformation was remarkable, and when Xander watched Fiona ride the black gelding for the first time, there were tears in his eyes. "You did this," he said in wonder. "You took a horse everyone said was ruined and brought him back." "We did it together," Fiona corrected. "You gave him time and space and the best care. I just helped him remember how to trust." Summer faded into autumn, and the leaves on the cottonwood trees around Fiona's cottage turned gold and russet. One evening in late September, Xander asked Fiona to ride out with him to a spot he wanted to show her. They rode to the top of a hill that overlooked the ranch, arriving just as the sun was beginning to set. From here they could see everything: the house and barn, the corrals and pastures, the horses grazing peacefully, the mountains rising in the distance. "This is where I stood 5 years ago when I bought this land," Xander said. "It was nothing then, just empty grassland and possibility. I was 23 years old, and I'd just inherited enough money from my grandfather to make a down payment. Everyone said I was crazy, that I was too young, that I'd lose everything." He smiled, still looking out over the view. "But I could see it, Fiona. I could see what it could become. The ranch, the horses, the life I wanted to build." "You've built something amazing," Fiona said softly. "We've built something amazing," Xander corrected, echoing her words from months earlier. He turned to face her then, and Fiona saw that he was nervous, his hands fidgeting with his hat. "Fiona Bennett, from the moment you walked into that corral and calmed a terrified horse with nothing but your voice, I knew my life was about to change. I just didn't know how much. You've made this place made me better in every way. You're strong and kind and brilliant. You make me laugh. You challenge me to be better. And I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." He dismounted and came to stand beside her horse, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. Then, to Fiona's shock and delight, he pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. "Fiona, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me officially and permanently? Will you let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you've made me?" Fiona's vision blurred with tears as she dismounted quickly, standing in front of him. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Xander, of course I'll marry you." He stood and opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the dying light. It wasn't fancy or elaborate, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. And when Xander slipped it onto her finger, Fiona thought it was the most perfect thing she'd ever seen. Then he was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of promise. And Fiona kissed him back with everything in her, pouring all her love and hope and joy into the embrace. They were married 6 weeks later, on a crisp November morning with the whole town in attendance. Fiona wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of the last wildflowers of the season. Xander wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Fiona's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was held in the small church in Ruby City, with the circuit preacher officiating and Jake standing up as Xander's best man. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xander kissed Fiona to cheers and applause from the congregation. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, and people danced and celebrated late into the evening. Fiona, watching Xander laugh with Jake and the other hands, felt a sense of completeness so profound it almost hurt. This was her family now, her home. She belonged here in a way she'd never belonged anywhere before. That night, in the main house where Fiona would now live as Xander's wife, they came together for the first time with tenderness and passion and love. Xander was gentle and patient, making sure Fiona felt safe and cherished. And Fiona discovered that physical intimacy could be beautiful when it was with someone you loved completely. Afterward, lying in Xander's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Fiona thought she'd never been so perfectly content. "I love you, Fiona Jamison," Xander murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Fiona whispered back, savoring her new name. Fiona Jamison. It felt right, like coming home. The first year of marriage was a time of adjustment and growth. Fiona moved into the main house, though she kept the cottage for storage and as a private space when she needed solitude. She continued working with the horses, her reputation growing as word spread about her methods and success rate. People began bringing Fiona their difficult horses from ranches as far as 50 miles away, willing to pay good money for her expertise. The income helped the ranch prosper, allowing Xander to expand his breeding program and buy better stock. Garrett and his men never returned, though Fiona heard through Marshal Bridger that they'd been arrested in Montana Territory for attempted robbery. Knowing they were behind bars allowed her to finally relax the vigilance she'd maintained since that confrontation in the yard. The ranch settled into peaceful productivity, with each season bringing its own rhythms and challenges. In the spring, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening after dinner, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "There's going to be 3 of us come winter," she said softly. The look of wonder and joy on Xander's face was something Fiona would treasure forever. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could feel his joy radiating through his whole body. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Xander said. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You've given me everything, Fiona. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Fiona said, and kissed him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Fiona had to eventually reduce her time in the saddle and let Jake and Samuel take over some of the more physical aspects of horse training. She focused instead on observation and instruction, teaching the ranch hands her methods so the work could continue. Xander was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried that Fiona was doing too much or not resting enough. She found his concern endearing, even when it occasionally frustrated her. In December, during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white, Fiona went into labor. Mrs. Chen, who had assisted at dozens of births, took charge with calm efficiency while Xander paced the hallway outside the bedroom, looking pale and anxious. Doc Miller had been called, but was delayed by the storm, so it was Mrs. Chen who helped Fiona through the long hours of labor, offering encouragement and practical advice. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Mrs. Chen wrapped him in a soft blanket and placed him in Fiona's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling. Fiona looked down at the tiny face, taking in every detail: the dark hair, the small nose, the way his hand wrapped instinctively around her finger. Love flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Xander was allowed in then, and he approached the bed like a man in a dream, his eyes fixed on the bundle in Fiona's arms. When he saw his son for the first time, he actually gasped, sinking down onto the edge of the bed. "He's so small," he said in wonder. "He'll grow," Fiona said, smiling through her exhaustion. "Would you like to hold him?" Xander took the baby with exaggerated care, cradling him against his chest. The baby's crying quieted, and his eyes opened briefly, unfocused, but searching. "Hey there, son," Xander said softly. "I'm your father, and I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to give you a good life, to teach you to be a good man, to show you what love and family mean." He looked at Fiona, his eyes bright with tears. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names during the pregnancy, but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at her husband holding their son, Fiona knew. "Thomas," she said, "after Tom Henderson, who gave me my chance and taught me so much. Thomas Alexander Jamison." "Thomas Alexander Jamison," Xander repeated, testing the name. I like it very much." He looked down at the baby. "Welcome to the world, Thomas. Welcome to the family." The years that followed were rich and full. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved the horses as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth, a cheerful baby with Fiona's auburn hair and Xander's dark eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Henry James, who entered the world during a thunderstorm and seemed to carry that energy with him always. The ranch prospered beyond even Xander's early dreams. Fiona's reputation as a horse trainer brought clients from across Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and the Jamison Ranch became known for producing quality animals with excellent temperaments. They hired more hands as the operation grew, and several of the men brought their families, creating a small community on the ranch property. Fiona made sure there was a school for the children, hiring a teacher from back east and converting one of the outbuildings into a classroom. Jake eventually married a widow from Ruby City, a kind woman named Martha who had 2 daughters from her first marriage. Samuel, no longer the shy young man Fiona had first met, fell in love with the school teacher and courted her with earnest determination until she finally agreed to marry him. Even Mrs. Chen found late-life romance with Doc Miller, the two of them marrying in a quiet ceremony when Mrs. Chen was 65 and Doc Miller 70. Through it all, Fiona and Xander's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course, about business decisions, about how to handle the children's various misadventures, about whether to expand the ranch further or consolidate what they had. But they always talked through their problems, always came back to the foundation of respect and affection that had drawn them together in the first place. Xander never forgot to tell Fiona he loved her, and Fiona never stopped being grateful for the day she'd walked into that corral and changed both their lives forever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Fiona back to the hill where he'd proposed. Their children were staying with Martha and Jake for the evening, giving the couple rare time alone. They stood together watching the sunset, Xander's arm around Fiona's waist, her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what I said when I proposed?" Xander asked, "that you'd made this place better in every way?" "I remember," Fiona said. "I didn't know the half of it then," Xander continued. "I couldn't have imagined how much better, how much richer and fuller and more beautiful life would become with you in it. The ranch, the horses, our children, this whole life we've built, none of it would exist without you, Fiona. You're the heart of everything we've created." Fiona turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. There was gray at his temples now, lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But to her he was as handsome as the day she'd met him. "We did it together," she said, as she had so many times before. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together, Xander. That's what partnership means." "Then here's to partnership," Xander said, and kissed her as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, "and to 10 more years, and 10 after that, and as many as were given." "As many as were given," Fiona agreed, and kissed him back. The years continued to unfold in their beautiful, unpredictable way. Thomas, at 16, showed a natural talent for breeding and bloodlines, spending hours studying the ranch's records and making suggestions for pairings that consistently produced excellent foals. Grace, at 13, had inherited her mother's gift with difficult horses and was already helping Fiona with training. Young Henry, at 11, was more interested in the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and charming visiting clients with his precocious intelligence. Fiona, now in her 30s, had become a respected figure not just on the ranch but throughout the territory. She wrote articles about horse training for agricultural journals, corresponded with other trainers across the West, and occasionally traveled to give demonstrations at regional fairs. But she always came home to the ranch, to Xander and their children, and the life they'd built together. One autumn evening, as Fiona was finishing up in the barn, she heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. She emerged to find a young woman dismounting from a lathered mare, her face flushed with exertion and hope. The woman couldn't have been more than 19, dressed in practical riding clothes with her blonde hair coming loose from its braid. "Mrs. Jamison?" the young woman asked breathlessly. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, but I've ridden 2 days to get here. My name is Clara White, and I've heard you're the best horse trainer in Idaho. I have a gelding that everyone says is untrainable, but I don't believe it. I think he's just scared and hurt and needs someone who understands. They say you can calm any wild horse with a whisper. Is that true?" Fiona smiled, recognizing herself in this earnest young woman with hope in her eyes and determination in her voice. "It's not quite as dramatic as all that," she said gently, "but yes, I can help. Bring your horse around tomorrow morning, and we'll see what we can do." As Clara thanked her profusely and accepted the offer of a meal and a place to sleep for the night, Fiona reflected on how far she'd come. She'd arrived at this ranch more than a decade ago with nothing but her skills and her determination, seeking only a job and a place to belong. She'd found all that and so much more: love, family, purpose, home. She'd helped build something lasting and good, something that would continue after she was gone, through her children and the people she'd trained and the methods she'd taught. That night, lying in bed with Xander's arm draped over her waist, Fiona thought about the younger version of herself who had stood in a corral and calmed a terrified mare. She thought about Xander saying, "My ranch needs someone like you," and how those words had changed everything. She thought about the life they'd built together, the love they shared, the family they'd created, and she thought about Clara White, another young woman with a gift and a dream, and how tomorrow Fiona would help her the way Tom Henderson had once helped Fiona. "What are you thinking about?" Xander murmured sleepily beside her. "Everything," Fiona said softly. "The past, the present, the future. How grateful I am for all of it." Xander pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Me too," he said. "Every single day, me too." And that, Fiona thought as she drifted off to sleep, was the best kind of happiness. Not the dramatic, overwhelming kind, but the steady, enduring kind built on shared work and mutual respect and love that grew deeper with each passing year. The kind that lasted. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Jamison Ranch flourished. Thomas, at 18, took on more responsibility for the breeding program, showing the same intuition and dedication his parents possessed. He fell in love with a young woman from Boise, the daughter of a banker, and after a proper courtship, they married in a ceremony that rivaled Fiona and Xander's own wedding in its joy and community celebration. Grace, at 15, was already earning a reputation as a skilled trainer in her own right, and several neighboring ranches had begun sending their problem horses to her specifically. Clara White, the young woman who'd arrived so breathlessly that autumn evening, became a regular visitor to the ranch. Fiona took her on as an apprentice of sorts, teaching her the methods Tom Henderson had taught Fiona years before. Clara proved to be an apt pupil, patient and intuitive, and Fiona saw in her a worthy successor to carry on the tradition of gentle, respectful horse training. When Clara eventually returned to her family's small ranch with her successfully trained gelding, she carried with her not just skills but a philosophy that she would pass on to others in turn. Xander, now approaching 40, had grown into his role as a prominent rancher and community leader. He served on the town council in Ruby City, helped establish a cooperative that allowed smaller ranchers to pool resources for better prices, and was known throughout the territory as a fair and honest man. But his greatest pride remained his family, Fiona and their children, and the life they'd built together on this land he loved. One spring morning, as Fiona was working with a young filly in the round pen, she noticed Xander standing at the fence watching her. There was something in his expression, a softness and depth of feeling that made her pause and walk over to him. "What is it?" she asked, reaching through the rails to take his hand. "I was just remembering," Xander said, "the first time I saw you do this. That mare from Tom Henderson's estate, the one everyone said was ruined. You walked into that corral, and within minutes, she was calm. I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "I still think that. Even after watching you do it hundreds of times, you still amaze me, Fiona, every single day." Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest. The same flutter she'd felt all those years ago, but deeper now, richer, tempered by time and trust and shared experience. "You know what amazes me," she said, "that you saw what I could do and valued it, that you gave me a chance when most men wouldn't have, that you fell in love with me not despite my unconventional skills but because of them, that you've spent 14 years being my partner in every sense of the word." 15 years this November, Xander corrected with a grin. "But who's counting?" "You are, apparently," Fiona teased. She glanced back at the filly, who was waiting patiently in the center of the pen. "I should finish up here, but tonight, after the children are in bed, let's take a walk. Just the two of us." "I'd like that," Xander said, and the look in his eyes promised that the walk might lead to other, more intimate activities. After 15 years of marriage, they were still passionate, still drawn to each other with a desire that hadn't dimmed with time. That evening, true to their plan, Fiona and Xander walked out into the warm spring night. The air smelled of new grass and wildflowers, and overhead the stars blazed in the clear sky. They walked without speaking at first, simply enjoying each other's presence and the peaceful beauty of the ranch at night. Eventually, they made their way to the cottonwood grove near Fiona's old cottage, which now served as housing for their head trainer, a man named Robert, who'd come from Wyoming specifically to learn Fiona's methods. "Do you ever miss it?" Xander asked, nodding toward the cottage. "Living there, I mean. Having your own space?" Sometimes, Fiona admitted. I liked the independence of it, the solitude, but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. The shared life, the partnership, waking up next to you every morning that's worth more than independence. She leaned into him, and Xander wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Besides, I still have the barn when I need solitude. The horses don't judge or make demands, they just are. That's what you've always loved about them, Xander observed. Their honesty. A horse can't lie or pretend. They show you exactly what they're feeling if you know how to read it. Unlike people, Fiona said with a small smile. Unlike people, Xander agreed. Though I like to think I'm fairly honest with you. You are, Fiona said seriously. That's one of the things I love most about you, Xander. Your integrity. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. You've never broken a promise to me, never given me reason to doubt you. She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Xander covered her hand with his, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. I know how precious you are, he said quietly. I know that every good thing in my life stems from the day you walked into that corral. I know that I would be half the man I am without you beside me. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I love you, Fiona. More now than the day I married you, if that's possible. You're my best friend, my partner, my love. You're everything. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the raw emotion in his voice. I love you too, she whispered. So much. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for building this life with me. They kissed then, deep and sweet, with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that still burned between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing a little faster, and Xander's eyes had darkened with desire. Should we head back to the house? He asked, his voice slightly rough. Yes, Fiona said, taking his hand. Let's go home. As they walked back through the night, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the scared girl she'd been when her grandmother died, about learning to rely on her skills to survive, about the loneliness of those years after Tom Henderson passed. She thought about the moment she'd seen Xander Jamison watching her work, the way something had shifted in her chest even then. She thought about falling in love, about taking the risk of opening her heart to someone, about discovering that partnership and love could exist alongside independence and strength. Most of all, she thought about the words Xander had spoken that first day. My ranch needs someone like you. She hadn't known then that he was right in ways neither of them could have imagined. The ranch had needed her skills, yes, but more than that, she and Xander had needed each other. They'd built something together that was greater than the sum of its parts, a home, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. The years flowed onward, bringing change and growth. Thomas and his wife had their first child, making Fiona and Xander grandparents at ages that still felt impossibly young. Grace fell in love with a young veterinarian who'd come to Ruby City to establish a practice, and their courtship was a joy to watch, marked by shared passion for animal welfare and mutual respect. Henry, always the scholar, announced his intention to go back east for university, wanting to study business and economics so he could bring modern management techniques to the ranch operations. Fiona, now in her early 40s, had become something of a legend in the territory. Stories about her ability to gentle wild horses had spread far and wide, growing in the telling until some people seemed to expect her to have actual magical powers. She found this amusing rather than annoying, though she always made sure to explain the real work behind her success to anyone who asked seriously. She'd trained dozens of apprentices over the years, men and women both, and several of them had gone on to establish their own training operations based on her methods, but the core of her life remained the same: the ranch, the horses, and Xander. They'd weathered storms both literal and figurative, a harsh winter that killed several cattle, a year of drought that tested everyone's endurance, the death of Jake from a heart attack that left the whole ranch in mourning. Through it all, they'd supported each other, their love a constant in a changing world. One evening in late summer, as Fiona and Xander sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, Xander said, "Do you remember what you said to me once? About how training horses was about partnership, not dominance?" "I remember," Fiona said. She was sitting in the rocking chair Xander had made for her 40th birthday, and he was on the porch steps, his back against the railing. "I've been thinking about that," Xander continued, "about how that philosophy applies to everything we've built. This ranch, our marriage, our family. It's all been about partnership, about respecting each other's strengths, supporting each other's weaknesses, working together toward common goals." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. "I don't think I fully understood that when I was younger. I thought success was about being strong, about being in control. But you taught me different. You taught me that real strength comes from knowing when to yield, when to listen, when to trust someone else's judgment." Fiona rose from the rocking chair and came to sit beside him on the steps, taking his hand. "You taught me things too," she said. "You taught me that it was safe to trust someone with my heart, that I could be vulnerable without being weak. You taught me that love doesn't diminish you, it expands you, makes you more than you were alone." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We taught each other, Xander. That's what the best partnerships do." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. Around them, the ranch settled into evening routines, horses being brought in for the night, barn doors closing, lamps being lit in the bunkhouse, and the other residences scattered across the property. It was peaceful and prosperous, the fulfillment of dreams neither of them could have fully articulated when they were younger. "I want to make sure it continues," Xander said eventually. "Everything we've built, the way we've built it, the respect for the animals, the care for the people who work here, the commitment to doing things right rather than just profitably." He squeezed Fiona's hand. "Thomas understands it, I think, and Grace certainly does, but I want to write it down, make it official. A mission statement or a charter or whatever you'd call it. Something that captures what the Jamison Ranch stands for so that even after we're gone, the principles remain." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Fiona said. "We should involve the children in creating it, make sure they have ownership of it too." And so they did. Over the following weeks, the whole family gathered around the dining table on Sunday evenings, discussing and debating what should be included in the ranch's founding principles. Thomas advocated for statements about sustainable breeding practices and animal welfare. Grace insisted on including commitments to humane training methods and respect for horses' natural behaviors. Henry, practical as always, wanted clauses about fair wages for workers and responsible financial management. Fiona contributed language about partnership and respect, while Xander focused on legacy and long-term thinking. The document they eventually created was both practical and philosophical, a blend of operational guidelines and core values. They had it printed on fine paper and framed, hanging it in the ranch office where everyone could see it. More importantly, they lived it every day, making decisions based not just on profit but on principle, treating their animals and their workers with dignity and respect. Years passed, marked by the usual milestones of life, weddings and births, achievements and losses, challenges and triumphs. Fiona's hair began to show threads of silver, and Xander's was more gray than dark now. They moved a little slower than they once had. Though both were still active and engaged with the ranch operations, they'd handed over many of the day-to-day responsibilities to Thomas and Grace, but they remained involved in major decisions and continued to work with horses when their bodies allowed. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a massive celebration. It seemed like half of Idaho Territory showed up, neighboring ranchers, people from town, former apprentices who'd traveled from Montana and Wyoming, even the now elderly Marshall Bridger and Clara White, who'd become a successful trainer in her own right. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and testimonial after testimonial about how Fiona and Xander had touched people's lives. When it was finally quiet late in the evening after most of the guests had left, Fiona and Xander found themselves back on that hill where he'd proposed so many years before. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. And from here they could see the ranch spread out below them, bigger now. More buildings, more horses, more life than either of them had dreamed possible. 25 years, Fiona said wonderingly. A quarter of a century? Best 25 years of my life, Xander said without hesitation, and hopefully we've got another 25 ahead of us. Fiona laughed. I don't know if I'll be training horses when I'm 70, but I appreciate the optimism. Why not? Xander challenged. You'll still have the knowledge, the skill, the gift. Age doesn't change that. Maybe not, Fiona conceded. She leaned against him, feeling the solidity of his presence, the warmth of his body beside hers. But even if I can't work with horses anymore, I'll have everything else. Our children, our grandchildren, this place we've built, and you. Always you. Always me, Xander agreed softly, until the day I die and beyond, if there's anything beyond. You're it for me, Fiona. The love of my life, the partner of my heart, everything good in me, everything worthwhile I've ever done, it's because of you. Not because of me, Fiona corrected gently. With me. Together, Xander. We did it together. He turned to look at her, his eyes catching the moonlight, and Fiona saw in his face all the years they'd shared, all the love and laughter and occasional tears, all the moments both ordinary and extraordinary that had woven their lives together. Together, he agreed, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion of their first kiss, their wedding kiss, and every kiss in between. And that, Fiona thought as she kissed him back, was the true measure of a successful life. Not wealth or fame, or even the beautiful ranch spread out below them, but this love that endured, partnership that strengthened rather than weakened over time, commitment that never wavered. This was what mattered. This was what she and Xander had built, and it would last far beyond their mortal years, carried forward in their children and the principles they'd instilled, in the horses they'd gentled, and the people they'd trained, in the love they'd shared, and the example they'd set. As they walked back down the hill hand in hand, both of them gray-haired and slower now, but still strong, still together, Fiona felt a profound sense of contentment. She'd come to this ranch 25 years ago seeking only work, and she'd found everything: love, family, purpose, home. She'd met a man who'd said, "My ranch needs someone like you," never knowing that she needed him just as much. Together they'd built something beautiful and lasting, and together they would continue to nurture and protect it for as long as they had breath. The ranch lights glowed warm in the darkness as they approached, welcoming them home, and inside their family waited children and grandchildren, old friends and trusted workers, all part of the community they'd created. This was legacy, Fiona thought. Not just property or possessions, but people and principles, love and partnership carried forward into the future. She squeezed Xander's hand, and he squeezed back, and together they walked home through the moonlit night, their steps synchronized after years of walking side by side. And in the morning they would wake and do it all again, working with horses, managing the ranch, loving each other because that was the life they'd chosen and built together. And there was nowhere else either of them would rather be. The years continued to unfold in their gentle, inexorable way. Thomas took over more of the breeding program, implementing innovative techniques he'd learned from correspondence with trainers back east while staying true to the humane principles his parents had instilled. Grace, married to her veterinarian and raising 2 children of her own, ran the training operation with skill that equaled her mother's. Henry returned from university with new ideas about ranch management that helped the operation become even more efficient and profitable without sacrificing its core values. The Jamison Ranch continued to be known throughout the territory and increasingly beyond it as a place where horses were treated with respect and trained with patience, where quality mattered more than quantity, and where the legacy of Fiona Bennett Jamison's gentle methods lived on. Fiona herself, now in her 50s, had officially retired from active training, though she still consulted on difficult cases and mentored young trainers who came from across the West to learn from her. She found satisfaction in teaching, in passing on not just techniques but philosophy, ensuring that the next generation understood that working with horses was about relationship, not dominance. She wrote a book, with Henry's help, documenting her methods and the principles behind them. It was published by a small press in San Francisco and became surprisingly popular among horsemen and women who were hungry for alternatives to the harsh breaking methods that were still common in many places. Xander, also in his 50s, had stepped back from the physical work of ranching, but remained deeply involved in the business and strategic planning. He and Fiona had become the elder statesmen of Ruby City, respected voices in community decisions, beloved figures at church socials and town celebrations. They'd helped establish a library in Ruby City, donated money for a new schoolhouse, and quietly supported families who fell on hard times. Their generosity was legendary, as was their enduring love for each other. People would sometimes ask them the secret to their successful marriage, especially young couples just starting out. Fiona's answer was always the same: respect, communication, and choosing each other every single day. Love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision, a commitment, a practice, and it's worth every bit of effort you put into it. On a clear autumn morning, 30 years after that first encounter in the corral, Fiona stood at the fence watching a young trainer work with a nervous mare. The trainer was using Fiona's methods, patient, calm, reading the horse's signals and responding appropriately. Fiona smiled, recognizing in the younger woman's movements the legacy of everything she'd taught and built. Xander came to stand beside her as he had so many times over the years. They stood in comfortable silence, their shoulders touching, watching the mare gradually relax under the trainer's gentle handling. "That could have been you 30 years ago," Xander said softly, calming a frightened horse, showing everyone watching that there was a better way. "It was me 30 years ago," Fiona agreed. "And now it's her, and it will be others after her. That's how it should be. Knowledge passed on, methods refined and improved, principles upheld." She turned to look at her husband, taking in the beloved face with its lines and gray hair, and the eyes that still looked at her with love and desire. "Thank you, Xander." "For what?" he asked, though he was smiling as though he knew. "For seeing me that first day, for giving me the chance, for falling in love with me and building this life with me and never once making me feel like I had to be less than I was." She reached for his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strong fingers that had held hers through 3 decades of joys and sorrows. "For being my partner in every sense of the word." "The privilege was all mine," Xander said, his voice rough with emotion. "You changed my life, Fiona. You made everything better, everything more. I was just a man with a ranch and some dreams. You made those dreams reality and gave me more than I ever knew to hope for." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Fiona leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I love you. I will always love you, until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Fiona whispered. "Always." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other as they'd done countless times before, and would countless times again for as long as they had. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity, horses whinnying, people working, life continuing in its eternal cycle. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Fiona and Xander finally released each other and walked hand in hand back toward the house, their steps still synchronized after 30 years of walking together. Behind them, the young trainer successfully approached the nervous mare, who stood calm and trusting under her gentle hands. The legacy continued. The work went on. And the love that had started it all, the love between a woman who could calm wild horses with a whisper and the cowboy who'd said, "My ranch needs someone like you," that love endured, as strong and steady as the mountains rising in the distance, as constant as the changing seasons, as lasting as the land itself. The end.